Okay. Well, today is going to be, I call it a special video, mostly because this post, this post flowed like honey. It was a rage-filled writing fest, and it was fucking beautiful, and I can't wait to share it with you. So let's get into it. We don't have a lot of time to waste. This is a bit longer than my normal post, so let's do this. Today's post is called Marc Andreessen is a Demilich of Tech. Now, for those of you not in the know, I don't really go into it in the blog post, but Marc Andreessen is an old school tech head. He was one of the founders and engineers that helped create the Netscape browser, which was really the first hit big time internet type of product thing back in the 90s, right? And there's a whole lot of history and there's a whole lot of things that happened there. But really, the long and short of this man's entire life is that since that moment, he was already an asshole and he's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And you just think, he can't get worse. Then he finds a way. So, as it happens, the other day I happened to click on a YouTube video entitled Meet the Silicon Valley Billionaire Ruining the World. And as it turns out, it made a very compelling argument that Marc Andreessen may in fact be one of the worst figures in tech. Now, this is a guy I don't think a whole lot about, and he's not one of those top tier names you hear about, day in, day out. Bezos, Gates, Ballmer. Well, of course, those two are kind of like not a thing, but, Nadella, right? I mean, so but nevertheless, you don't hear this guy's name very often unless you're really, deeper in tech. So nowadays he runs a venture capital firm and called Andreessen Horowitz, and their website is a2z.com. So, the first letter of his name and the last letter of Mr. Horowitz's name, right? Whatever. Anyway, the video was quite compelling, and I link it in the post, and I was happy to have spent 13 minutes watching it. It did, however, inspire me to go look at some of the source material it referenced, most notably an essay that Marc wrote almost 3 years back entitled The Techno-Optimist Manifesto. Now, as it so happens, this blog post is going to be my response to a particular section of this manifesto, which is called The Enemy. However, let me be very clear. Just because I'm focusing on this particular section doesn't mean that the other sections aren't worth your time and aren't in some ways just as fucking horrifying, okay? You should probably read the entire thing, right? I have no idea how I didn't hear about this when it was published in October of 2023. But in a way, I'm almost glad that it worked out this way. The statements made within its paragraphs, most of which I am going to quote here, fair use, just in case, Marc's lawyers get a burr up their fucking ass, right? The statements made within in this really cut to the core of so much of the abhorrent behavior we are seeing in tech nowadays, doubly so in regards to AI. So what is it I found so insulting and skin-crawling about this section that I just had to write a response to it? Well, dear reader, let's go through it piece by piece, shall we? So this is me quoting Marc, just to be clear, seeing how other people are taken out of context, quoting people as of late, let's say Hassan, right? I'm going to be very careful about this. But the quote is, "We have enemies. Our enemies are not bad people, but rather bad ideas. Our present society has been subjected to a mass demoralization campaign for 6 decades against technology and against life, under varying names like existential risk, sustainability, ESG, sustainable development goals, social responsibility, stakeholder capitalism, precautionary principle, trust and safety, tech ethics, risk management, degrowth, and the limits of growth. This demoralization campaign is based on bad ideas of the past, zombie ideas, many derived from communism, disastrous then and now, that have refused to die." Okay, that's the end of the quote for this portion. Let's unpack that, because there is a mega fuck ton of things to unpack here. What really stands out above everything else is that nearly every principle mentioned in that paragraph represents values that I hold near and dear to my heart. I believe adherence to most, if not all, of those principles are what allows us to effectively distinguish between ethical engineers and unethical engineers. Of particular note is the reference to the precautionary principle, which I linked to the full definition if you're interested. Though if you aren't aware, I quote, the basic gist of this. The precautionary principle in its simplest form states when an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. End of quote. To put this in the form of a very old adage that I'm sure most have heard before, do not go where angels feel to tread, right? Or at least be cautious about it, right? So, in other words, be cautious when faced with the unknown and do your best to minimize possible harm. Simple enough, right? Of course, as a principle, this statement of virtue stands in direct opposition to at least one of the most idiotic adages. That is not a word that's easy for me to pronounce. Passed around by other big tech billionaires and their legions of acolytes / followers, namely, move fast and break things. Yeah, well, guess what? I don't want to break things. Breaking things creates problems for my clients and for me. My goal is to reduce their problems and by extension, reduce my own. So yeah, I'm a big believer in the precautionary principle, and I would go even so far as to say that my general adherence to it is one of the primary reasons I have experienced any actual success within the context of my now dwindling engineering career. But of course, doing things in a way that is methodical, involves checking and rechecking, and spending substantial amounts of time thinking about how the task at hand fits into the bigger picture. And to be clear, I'm not just talking about scale, but rather society and the world at large. This is no longer in vogue. This correlates with the rise of LLM-based tech, also known as AI for suckers, and the tidal wave of amoral behavior and attitudes that have taken this industry by storm over the last few years. Finally, the fact he absolutely could not resist mentioning communism really says it all in my mind. This is a classic red herring that is so overused that it's almost trite at this point. Well, it would be if it didn't work on vast swaths of our questionably educated populace. Let's continue. Begin quote. Our enemy is stagnation. Our enemy is anti-merit, anti-ambition, anti-striving, anti-achievement, anti-greatness. Our enemy is statism, authoritarianism, collectivism, central planning, socialism. Our enemy is bureaucracy, vetocracy, gerontocracy, blind deference to tradition. Our enemy is corruption, regulatory capture, monopolies, cartels. Listen, Marc, just as an aside here, learn to use the word fucking and make these things so they flow. Like, language has a purpose, and flowing language helps to bring the reader along. It's like a ride, and you don't want it to be like breaking a bronco. You want it to be like riding on a fancy stagecoach and clip, 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 clip. It's a very pleasant trip, right? Until the horse poops, then maybe it's not so pleasant. Not all the time. You can't all be winners. Nevertheless, okay, so number one, he uses a lot of words here that I personally was not familiar with, at least a couple of them. Specifically, vetocracy is one. Where vetocracy is a dysfunctional system of government whereby no single entity can acquire enough power to make decisions and take effective charge. Is it dysfunctional? Because that sounds an awful lot like a democracy, right? I don't know. Call me crazy, okay? Then there's a gerontocracy, right? Which is a form of rule in which a political entity is ruled by leaders who are substantially older than most of the population. And you know what? Yeah, that's bad. To it depends. It really depends. The relative positioning of the age of those doing the ruling versus those being ruled. It depends on how capable they still are. There's a lot of variables that go into that, but generally you could look at this concept as being a bad one. I mean, we are clearly living within a gerontocracy gerontocracy now, and it is bad. It is not bad because they're old. It is bad because they are incapable and they are inflexible and they do not understand most of the issues they are currently grappling with, right? That's what makes it bad. So I find this is also a bit of a red herring, this term, because it turns what is, the result of a very relative calculation that is, mired in various variables and just simplifies it into old people suck. Great. Okay, fine, whatever. Not. Anyway, there's also a lot to unpack in this statement, but I'm going to summarize it very succinctly. This statement by Marc, in a very Trumpian manner, is basically pure projection, right? Much like when Trump accuses others of being crooks by committing some act or another, he is basically projecting his own sins onto others. That is exactly what Marc is doing here. If you look at the way big tech has evolved over the last few decades, they have basically created a culture of stagnation, which is predicated on pushing all of the other virtues or concepts that they listed after that, right? LLMs basically double down on this by essentially guaranteeing our future will be stagnant because as more and more tech executives and people in general turn to LLMs as their primary source of inspiration, validation, and brainstorming, they are pigeonholing themselves into an artificial world whose boundaries are defined only by everything that came before it, at least whatever they managed to get inhaled into its matrix while the underlying model was being trained. Big tech is literally the poster child for authoritarianism, central planning, and bureaucracy. Don't believe me? What happens when AWS or Azure announces that a cloud service your company depends on is going to cease to exist? Do you get to push back? Are you given an opportunity to offer feedback? Is it put up for a fucking vote? Hell no. You can't even get these people on the fucking phone, much less actually make an effective appeal to them. The terms vetocracy, gerontocracy, corruption, monopolies, and cartels really stand out as well. Why? Well, that's basically what big tech is. A gang of demiliches, and if you're not familiar with the term, I do provide a Wikipedia link that explains what that means in Dungeons and Dragons terms. If you're welcome, because being introduced in that world can only make your life better. So, yeah. But they are a gang of demiliches who have obtained so much power that their only two remaining instincts are to preserve the source of that power, also known as their phylacteries. That term will come up later again in a pop quiz, so try to take note. Please write it down. Right? And to expand it by any means possible. Again, in order to prove this notion, I need only point to the public and caustic actions taken by every fucking big tech CEO since Trump took office for his second term in January of 2025. They all flocked to Trump like moths would to a flame. Prior to that point, a lot of people were lying to themselves as they were convinced that big tech was at least somewhat progressive and liberal leaning. This could not be further from the truth. Big tech is willing to cozy up to whomever it has to and engage in petty virtue signaling as often as it feels it needs to as a means to an end. That end, of course, is to increase their influence, their power, and most importantly, their fortunes. But wait, this just gets better and better. Begin quote. Our enemy is institutions that in their youth were vital and energetic and truth-seeking, but are now compromised and corroded and collapsing, blocking progress in increasingly desperate bids for continued relevance, frantically trying to justify their ongoing funding despite spiraling dysfunction and escalating ineptness. Our enemy is the ivory tower, the know-it-all credentialed expert worldview indulging in abstract theories, luxury beliefs, social engineering, disconnected from the real world, delusional, unelected, and accountable, playing God with everyone else's lives, with total insulation from the consequences. Now, end quote. I am very proud of myself because I made it through that quote without laughing my ass off. I mean, are you kidding me? Ineptness? Have you fucking used any of your software lately, Marc? It's shit, and it gets worse with each passing month, week, year, whatever. It's fucking terrible. Escalating ineptness, spiraling dysfunction. Wasn't GitHub down like fucking 8 hours yesterday? What the fuck is going on? GitHub used to almost never go down. What the fuck? This is crazy. Everything is falling apart, and yet these guys are just like, hey man, we'll just take another toke on the AI bong, bitch, and it'll fix all your problems. No, it won't. It won't fix shit, right? And then to talk about the whole ivory tower thing and people being, disconnected from the real world. This is coming from a guy who I didn't bother to go look this up, but like every other big tech oligarch, this motherfucker probably has at least a bunker constructed somewhere, stocked, ready to go with ammunition, food, and a private security force to keep his fat ass in gear while the rest of the world spirals into a fucking Mad Max-like hellscape. Right? This is the problem right here. Like, these people literally don't, they're not, like, they're like, it's like that scene in the Dune movie from 1984 where they bring in the space guild navigator, and he's in this big fucking tank, and he's this worm-like, and he's just floating around in all the spice, and he's just like, I can see to the future, Paul Atreides, right? But this dude is like used to be human, and yet he's not. That's what these people are. They're just so fucking far gone that they just see the world as some sort of fucking transactional little chess game, right? Which is basically how Trump acts, and he's just as inept and as dysfunctional as the rest of them, right? Okay. Anyway, side ran over. Let's get back to what I actually wrote, right? What's truly notable about the quote is that this is word for word how I would describe big tech in its present form. Yeah, which is pretty much what I just ranted. So yes, this is basically more projection. There's a lot of that in Marc's essay, as it turns out. Even as people have begun to strongly reject AI and its ancillary tech symptoms like data centers for various reasons, this hasn't made a dent and the number of soulless tech executives who keep getting in front of microphones, cameras, and live audiences and extolling how AI is going to change the world by spiriting away our current ability to barely keep the lights on and feed our families. They are literally playing God with our lives. They are disconnected from the real world, delusional, unelected, and unaccountable. They live within the proverbial ivory tower and lord their resulting dominion over us whenever possible. There are, of course, consequences that will, that's another grammar error, one day arrive as a result of these actions. I, for one, will not shed a tear when their ivory tower comes toppling down. Rather, I will revel in the profound joy I will undoubtedly feel at that very moment. Okay, begin quote, this time a short one. Our enemy is speech control and thought control, the increasing use in plain sight of George Orwell's 1984 as an instruction manual, end quote. As a huge Orwell fan, this one really hits home for me. Coming from a billionaire who is one of the core architects of a world where big tech is gathering data on our every single move, this smacks of somebody who is either overtly lying or stunningly unaware of how he is perceived. Whether it be from our contact lists, our phones' Bluetooth pings, our license plates being scanned by an army of flock cameras, or endless online storefronts in which every purchasing decision is scrutinized and every ounce of available data on prior activity is used to funnel us into purchasing even more shit we don't need, big tech is the absolute modern-day incarnation of Big Brother. The only difference between our current reality and the fictional one described in 1984 is the fact that government isn't the main perpetrator, but rather a ride-along playmate that rubber stamps, legitimizes, and seeks to reap the benefits of big tech's intractable web of surveillance. Okay. Begin quote. Our enemy is the precautionary principle, which would have prevented virtually all progress since man first harnessed fire. The precautionary principle was invented to prevent large-scale deployment of civilian nuclear power, perhaps the most catastrophic mistake in Western society in my lifetime. The precautionary principle continues to inflict enormous unnecessary suffering on our world today. It is deeply immoral, and we must jettison it with extreme prejudice. End quote. Wow, this old riff. Nuclear power isn't our future, at least not from the standpoint of fission. Fusion could be it, but like quantum computing, it's currently nothing more than a fucking pipe dream fueled by science fiction and marketing malarkey. Fission had its place, and it served its purpose, but the cold, hard reality is that there isn't enough fissionable material to make it a universal reality. In addition, storing the waste generated from those operations is a massive problem, and our current solution essentially involves building containment systems for the waste that will outlive the human race but not the waste itself, at which point the consequences consequences will become some other species' problem, assuming, of course, that we have enough courtesy to allow any of them to outlive us. TLDR, worshipping at the altar of nuclear power is a sign of somebody who hasn't fully considered the consequences. Surprise, surprise, surprise. We should, of course, be focusing on green energy. It's the only option that makes long-term sense. Getting our energy from the wind that blows and the sun that shines without consuming what are effectively unreplenishable materials makes sense because it's already there, just waiting for us to harness it. Its usefulness will likely exceed the longevity of the human race and what will likely be our species' short lifespan, making it effectively infinite in terms of supply. The reality is that this essay is Marc's mission statement. He is coming out of the closet as a techno-fascist draped in the vestiges of the tempting but ultimately intellectually bankrupt ethos of libertarians. He, like any other card-carrying fascist, is defining everything in terms of us and them. If you agree, you are one of us. If you disagree, you are one of them. Remind you of anyone? That's exactly the fucking game the Trump administration has been playing since they rolled back into office. And fuck all these people. This is ridiculous. He opens by claiming that the real enemies are bad ideas, but he spends each and every sentence after that building the case for why they need to be purged by outlining all of the theoretical harms they have perpetrated on society as a whole. I'm one of them. Come get me, asshole. Finally, skipping to the end of the section. Begin quote. We will explain to people captured by these zombie ideas that their fears are unwarranted and the future is bright. We believe these captured people are suffering from resentment, a witch's brew of resentment, bitterness, and rage that is causing them to hold mistaken values that are damaging to both themselves and the people they care about. We believe we must help them find their way out of their self-imposed labyrinth of pain. We invite everyone to join us in techno-optimism. The water is warm. Become our allies in pursuit of technology, abundance, and life. End quote. Marc finally ends his essay with a clarion call in which he strongly implies that we, a group encompassing anyone who finds themselves caught up in the wide net cast by his previous definitions of what ideas makes you one of them, will either join them or perish. Nearly 3 years after this was originally published, I think most of us are beginning to see the truth. The future being pushed by big tech is not bright. Our fears are warranted. We are becoming increasingly tired of being surveilled. We are angry that electricity is becoming a luxury commodity. We are sick of big tech commanding us at every turn. We are disgusted by the growing partnership between more traditional fascists and techno-fascists that is now pushing society towards what can only be described as a red fucking line. To bring this full circle, the reason I find this particular section of Marc's manifesto so disturbing is that it basically paints anyone who is even remotely concerned with the well-being of others as an impediment to progress. That is a line of thought I will never agree with. Marc's manifesto makes it clear that he long ago stopped caring about people, the people whose lives and fortunes are upended by his growing, unsated desire for power and wealth. To him, they are nothing more than annoying ants boiling out from the remains of the anthill that he and his oligarch friends just stepped all the fuck on. To close, I for one reject Marc's vision of the future and urge everyone else out there to join me in that pronouncement. I cannot wait for the day that somebody finds his phylactery and the phylacteries of his big tech billionaire compatriots and smashes them into a million fucking pieces. The only way that we the people will ever be able to have an actual say in our future is to reclaim the power and autonomy that Marc and the other Demiliches like him have robbed us of. This includes all of the other non-techno-fascists out there as well. As long as we allow these soulless husks to maintain their death grip on the levers of power, we will remain forever entrapped by their deluded and ill-considered machinations. This must not be allowed to continue, regardless of the cost. And that will conclude today's blog post / rant. This came from a place of passion, and I think you'll be able to tell that and how it's written. They're all passionate, but this one, boy, I read that essay in this section, and I let it sit for a few days and just simmer, and then I sat down yesterday and I got the rough draft of this done. and it was just fucking brilliant. Like it was one of the easiest things I've ever had to write, because there's just letting this just congeal for a few days really got me going on it. Anyway, I appreciate everyone hanging out, and I hope you found this as enjoyable to listen to and to read as I found to make it. And yeah, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed what you see here, and stay tuned. There's more to come. Always more to come. There's no ending, no end to the amount of shit I want to bitch about or to commentate on. So yeah, I'll be back. Anyway, have a good one.